Hi, Serena. Um, After our talk, I started looking into just whatever information I can find about CNV. Um, and not long after that, I started seeing a lot of different parallels between what we understand about cranial mechanics and how the cranium is designed to dissipate and regulate pressure and the implications of the lack of that, and how that could potentially connect some dots between the pathogenesis of CNV and what we know about how things can potentially go wrong in the cranium in terms of regulating pressure. But before we get into that, let's look at sort of some eyeball anatomy. Now, I'm not sure if you've looked into that, but sort of I want to cover all my ground, right? So we know the main thing that you're particularly concerned about with CNV is how it affects your vision, um, namely how blood gets into the back of your eyes and obviously makes it significantly more difficult for you to see. Um, as we can see here, your arteries and veins of, that supplies the eyeball comes through the middle of your optic nerve, right? So this yellow thing, this yellow stuff, is your optic nerve, right? And we'll flip a couple pages after this book later to look at the blood supply network that is around the eyeball. Okay, so um, when they talk about neovascularization, right? They specifically they're referring to when new blood supply or new veins slash arteries grow, right? Neo, right? Um, One thing you sort of should understand is that um, arteries and veins are things just like the rest of the body that grows quite a bit. Nothing, very few things on the body grow faster than these guys. And they are dying and being recreated every day, every moment of every day, just like the red blood cells that they carry. My point is, whenever you have any kind of destruction happening for veins and arteries, new ones will be created. Right, the body is constantly trying to maintain a baseline amount of veins and arteries for all the things that need a blood supply. So something like choroidal neovascularization, it happens because veins and arteries were destroyed to begin with, right? So but the body's never gonna just make you new things. This shit costs money, right? This shit costs food and energy, right? There's nothing that the body cares more about than preservation and the optimization of the use of energy. They're not gonna just make you new shit, right? Then everybody can just think to be jacked and everybody will be jacked, right? That ain't how that shit works. You gotta break some shit first before the body is gonna make you some new ones, right? So more on that later. So in other words, something, we'll talk about what that something might be in my opinion, something is breaking the arteries and veins, most likely arteries, in here, causing the brain to want to make new ones, right? Okay, so let's look at what else is connected to this. We talked about this on the phone, but let's talk. Let's talk about what else is here. Right? All right, so creepy picture of a skull and some eyeballs. Enjoy that. So these guys. So you have a muscle here. You have a muscle here. You have a bunch of muscles here, and you got another thing of muscle here. These are called, as a group, they are called your extraocular muscles. Extra, outside of, ocular, eyeball, right? The muscles outside the eyeball. And they control the movement of your eyes. Now, the thing is, if you can imagine 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I think there's more behind this, if they were all to contract together, they simply compress your eyeball, right? But if they were to contract, one at a time, maybe you would then move the eyeball up, down, and left, right. But the thing is, your eyeball is never moving in a pure linear fashion, right? You're always going to be moving, you know, up and down to some degree, or up and left, and whatever. It will be a combination of different, cardinal plane directions, right? Um, in other words, it's totally possible for these muscles to either pull too hard towards one direction or not pull enough, right? But that'll be something we'll talk about potentially later. Now, the real reason I sort of set this up, right? So this right here is your optic nerve. I don't know the name of this color, but anyways, this relatively thick nerve thing that we're looking at, that's your optic nerve, right? And obviously this thing is your brain, and it connects your brain. So this part of the brain that I've cut off, but it connects to your brain directly, and the other end of it is your eyeball, right? If we can look at this, right? The other end of it is your eyeball. So there is a pretty big bone that runs through, or there's a pretty big bone that your optic nerve runs through. Okay, this thing is called your sphenoid, and this thing is pretty much functionally at the center of your skull. Spatially, it's not in the center of your skull, but this thing touches almost every cranial bone, and the position of this bone has profound implications on your nervous system's ability to regulate pressure across your cranium. That, fortunately and unfortunately, includes your jaw, because your jaw connects to your cranium here. Okay, so I'm gonna go at my speed, because you can obviously rewind this video, right? So how does this thing move, right? In what direction does it move? We're going to go into that next. Okay, cool. So this is from a teeth orthodontic journal some years ago, and the concept behind what I'm about to talk about next has been around for about close to almost 100 years. For individuals in the healthcare system or professions outside of traditional medicine. So my point is, MDs don't study this in school. They study other things. They pretty much study almost everything else about the body other than this. Anyways, so this is the sphenoid, the last bone that we talked about that the optic nerve runs through. This thing, the occiput, is essentially the back of your head. Now, this is the temporal bone on the left side. This is a left temporal bone. And so temporal bone is the bone that your ear sit in. So when you do certain things, in this situation, in this particular situation, when you're stepping or loading on your right foot and right leg, and just generally your right side, your sphenoid is going to turn this way, meaning the right side of the sphenoid is going to go back, among other things, and the left side of your sphenoid is going to go forward, right, matching what the arrows are showing. Right. Now, that being said, your sphenoid is not going to move a whole lot like, how your fingers would move, but they certainly move enough to make a big difference, to make a functional difference. Okay. So we're going to go back to the 3D model to get you a sort of a more contextual view of what the hell's going on. What did I just say? Right. Okay. All right. Cool. That was what we were looking at. So back of your head, right here. This would be your face if we had more things here. This is more or less what the previous diagram was depicting. Temporal bone here, right? So, right, your ear about here, your ear hole here. Your jaw goes into here. Okay. So, in other words, when certain things happen, this part is going to go back. Now, if you remember the last time we were here in this 3D program, your optic nerve runs through this hole right here. So if this part of this bone was going to go back, and this part of the bone is going to go forward, your right optic nerve is going to get yanked on, right? Let's go back to this. Okay, right. So in this situation, we're talking about uh, this bone, this part of this bone going back, right? Um, Yanking or applying pressure on this. Now, the thing is, we're not just talking about bones moving back in a vacuum. There's a whole network of muscles that's gonna make this happen. They're gonna pull on each other. That creates the forces um, that would otherwise allow or force a pull um, this part of the sphenoid back. So even if the sphenoid doesn't go back, the pressure is there. Not to mention the sphenoid absolutely does go back, right? Um, we're gonna go back to the anatomy picture. Okay, cool. So now, with all of that said, can you sort of see how then, if this thing, if you think of this as a rope, and this rope is being yanked on, right? And obviously, your eye socket is gonna, to a very large degree, prevent your eyeball from going, into the bone to a certain degree. Um, then the only thing that's going to be yanked on is this rope that is your optic nerve. Now, unfortunately for this situation, your blood vessels, your arteries, and your veins are the weakest things in terms of structural integrity out of this whole region. Or rather, they're the most brittle, right? Obviously, your eye's squishy, so they're not, all that hard. But the thing is, they're squishy so that when forces are applied to them, they can just change shape, right? They won't break. Now, I understand, lacquer crack formation is a pretty common thing for CNV, but nevertheless, um, these things are lacquer cracks are probably more useful to think of as ruptures, right? Just like when you rip fabric or clothing, right? They're not cracks because that would suggest something is hard. Nothing in your eyeball is hard. So, anyways, your optic nerve, first of all, is thick as all hell, right? Second of all, there's this sheath, right? This called meningeal sheath, right? When people have meningitis, is that connective tissue layer of the brain is being invaded by virus. So, anyways, this is born of the same layer and definitely same material. It's a sheath of connective tissue, and such sheaths are around all nerves, right? Every single fucking nerve in your body has a protective layer that is not nerve around it, so they can be protected because obviously they're very important. Um, so if this was to get yanked on, blood supply will be the first thing to die, or the first thing to break. Once it breaks, well, your eyeball still needs blood supply, so your body makes new ones, right? So that's sort of how I'm looking at all of this. That your uh, sphenoid is moving in a way that is way too patterned, and it's not spending enough time going the opposite direction. Meaning, oh, you know what? Let's do it this way. Meaning, this part of the sphenoid is not going forward enough, and this part of the sphenoid is not spending enough time going backwards. Your brain, for one reason or another, we'll talk more about that when I see you, is spending way too much time getting this part of the sphenoid going back and the left part of the sphenoid going forward. If we can reverse that, who knows what's going to happen? Maybe we can manage this CNV thing. We don't know. We should find out. All right, that's all I have. And obviously, feel free to shoot me any questions you may have. And I will see you Thursday. Have a good night.